The encounter in the ruins. The night was cold, and the ruins of the battlefield were silent. Broken ships lay half-buried in the dust, their metal torn and blackened by fire. The war between humans and alien clans had ended months ago, but the scars of destruction still remained. Among the wreckage, one man moved carefully, searching for anything useful. His name was Daniel, a simple explorer and scavenger. He was not a soldier, not a hero, just a man trying to survive in a broken world. His backpack was almost empty, and his stomach ached from hunger. He carried a small light and an old rifle, his only protection in the dangerous wasteland. As Daniel stepped over the shattered hull of a fallen ship, he froze. He thought he heard something, a sound too soft to be the wind. At first, he believed it was only his imagination. But then he heard again, a faint whisper, a weak breath, almost like a cry. He followed the sound, moving quietly through the shadows. There, behind a pile of twisted steel, he saw her. A girl, or perhaps not a girl, but something more. Her skin was pale silver under the moonlight, her hair tangled, her body thin and weak. She was dressed in broken pieces of alien armor, the marks of a warrior still clinging to her form. Her eyes flickered open when she saw him, sharp and glowing with faint light. They were the eyes of someone proud, someone who had fought many battles. But now they were clouded with pain. She tried to raise a blade, but her hand shook too much to lift it. Daniel did not raise his rifle. Instead, he looked at her with caution and curiosity. The girl whispered something in a language he did not understand. Her voice was rough and broken, as if she had not spoken for many days. Slowly, Daniel opened his pack and pulled out a small ration bar. It was the last one he had, but something inside told him to offer it. He placed it on the ground and pushed it toward her. The warrior girl looked at him with suspicion, her pride fighting against her hunger. For a moment she refused, her trembling hand clenching the broken blade. But then her strength gave out, and she grabbed the food. She devoured it quickly, her sharp teeth tearing through the dry ration. Every bite seemed to bring her back from the edge of death. Daniel watched silently, his hand resting on his rifle in case she turned violent. But she did not attack. Instead, when the food was gone, she lowered her blade. Her eyes softened for the first time, and he thought he saw a trace of gratitude. "Who are you?" Daniel asked quietly, though he knew she would not understand his words. The girl said nothing, only breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling like a storm, finally calming. Daniel noticed scars across her arms and neck, old wounds mixed with new ones. Whoever she was, she had been through battles beyond his imagination. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying the smell of smoke and rust. Daniel looked around nervously, afraid that others might come. The battlefield was full of dangers, raiders, wild beasts, and even the patrols of alien survivors. Staying here was risky, but leaving her behind felt wrong. He sighed, pulling off his old coat, and carefully placed it over her thin shoulders. She flinched at first, as if expecting a strike. But when no harm came, she allowed it, her tired eyes closing halfway. Daniel could see the weight of exhaustion dragging her down. For the first time in months, Daniel felt something strange inside him. It was not just pity, not just duty. It was a sense that this meeting was not an accident. The ruins had hidden many secrets, but this one seemed different. The girl coughed weakly, then whispered again in her alien tongue. Daniel could not understand, but he heard the tone, soft, almost pleading. He knelt beside her, shaking his head with a faint smile. "Don't worry," he said, his voice calm. "I'm not your enemy." She stared at him for a long moment, her glowing eyes studying his face. Perhaps she could not understand his words, but something in his tone reached her. Her hand slowly released the broken blade, letting it fall to the ground with a dull clang. In that silent, fragile moment, the bond between them began. Neither of them knew what the future held. Daniel thought he was only giving food to a stranger. The warrior girl thought she was only surviving another night. But fate had already written a different story. This act of kindness would not end here. It would echo through battles, through love, through destiny. And one day, this starving warrior girl would no longer be just a stranger. She would be his future bride, the silent bond. The ruins were quiet, but not safe. Daniel stayed close to the wounded warrior girl, watching her breathe slowly under the old coat he had given. She looked fragile, almost broken, yet her eyes still carried the fire of someone who had once been strong. The battlefield had stolen her strength, but not her spirit. For hours she remained silent, eating small pieces of food whenever Daniel offered. Her hands trembled, but each bite pulled her back from the edge of death. Daniel wanted to ask questions: who she was, what had happened, why she had been left here. But every time he opened his mouth, he stopped because he knew she would not understand his words. The silence between them grew heavy. Still, it was not an empty silence. There was something inside it, something unspoken but powerful. It felt as if the ruins themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. At one point, the girl tried to stand. Her legs shook violently, and she almost collapsed. Daniel rushed forward, catching her before she hit the ground. She pushed him away weakly, her pride refusing help, but her body betrayed her. She sat back down, her face turned away, ashamed of her weakness. Daniel did not argue. He only sat across from her, quietly fixing the small fire he had built from scraps of wood and metal. The flames flickered, casting long shadows on the ruins around them. For the first time, the girl's eyes softened, reflecting the firelight. She pulled her knees close to her chest and studied him carefully. A human, thin but strong in his own way, not dressed like a soldier, not moving like a warrior. Yet there was something steady in him, something that even her warrior's pride could not ignore. When he handed her a can of water, she hesitated, then finally accepted. She drank in silence, but her gaze never left his face. Hours passed slowly. Daniel spoke sometimes, not expecting answers. He talked about his search for supplies, about the ruined cities, about how hard survival had become. He knew she could not understand, but speaking filled the emptiness. And strangely, she listened, as if his voice itself carried meaning beyond words. When the night deepened, the wind howled louder, carrying dust through the broken ships. Daniel tightened his coat around her, careful not to frighten her. She did not pull away this time. Her eyes closed halfway, but she was not asleep, only watching him with the last fragments of strength. The silent bond grew stronger. No words were spoken, but something deeper passed between them. A warrior who had lost everything, and a man who had nothing but kindness to give. They were strangers, enemies by blood, yet in the ruins, they were only two survivors clinging to life. At dawn, when the first light touched the broken battlefield, the girl stirred. She whispered a single word in her alien tongue, her voice soft and cracked. Daniel did not understand, but he heard the tone, and it sounded like a name, maybe her own, maybe someone she had lost. The pain in her voice was so clear that he felt it in his chest. For the first time, he reached out and gently touched her arm. She did not strike, did not resist, only looked at him with tired, glowing eyes. Something inside her shifted, a wall of pride beginning to crack. And Daniel realized that trust, once impossible, was starting to grow. He smiled faintly, pointing to himself. "Daniel," he said, slowly and clearly. The girl blinked, tilting her head as if trying to understand. She did not repeat the word, but her lips moved slightly, as if shaping it silently. In that moment, without language, without promises, the first thread of connection was made. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt alive, filled with meaning neither of them could explain. Daniel thought he had only saved a stranger. But in truth, he had already begun to save himself. And the bond they forged in those ruins would grow stronger than either could imagine. Because in the heart of silence, trust was being born. And trust, in a broken world, was the most dangerous and powerful thing of all. The warrior's secret. The second morning in the ruins was colder than the first. Daniel woke to the sound of movement beside him. The warrior girl was already on her feet, though her body was weak and unsteady. She leaned against a broken wall, her glowing eyes fixed on the horizon. Daniel sat up slowly, careful not to startle her. The fire had burned out during the night, leaving only ashes. The silence between them felt different now, less hostile, more uncertain. It was the silence of two people learning how to exist near each other. The girl turned her head toward him, her face unreadable. She pointed at herself, then spoke one word in her alien tongue. Daniel listened carefully, repeating it softly, though clumsy, on his lips. A faint light appeared in her eyes, not joy, but recognition. It was her name, a piece of her identity finally revealed. She did not give more at first, only studied him with suspicion. But Daniel knew this was the beginning of trust. He spoke his own name again, slower, pointing to his chest. This time, she whispered it back, the sound rough but clear. "Daniel," she said, as if testing the weight of it. For the first time, he heard her voice carry more strength. It was not the voice of someone dying, but of someone remembering who she was. Later, as the day grew, she began to show him more. Pieces of her story slipped through gestures, broken words, and the sharp intensity of her eyes. Daniel learned she had once belonged to a warrior clan. They had been proud, fierce, and feared across the stars. Her armor, though shattered, carried the marks of honor. Every scar on her body was proof of battle survived. But there was betrayal. Her voice hardened when she spoke of it, her hands trembling with anger. Her clan had abandoned her, left her to die in the ruins after defeat. To them, weakness was dishonor, and she had become nothing in their eyes. Daniel listened, not to the words, for most he could not understand, but to the feeling behind them. He saw the fury, the grief, the loneliness. She had lost not only her strength, but her place in the world. A warrior without a clan was like a blade without an edge. At night, she sat near the fire, silent again, but Daniel noticed how her eyes never closed fully. She was haunted, trapped between anger at her people and disbelief at her survival. Yet there was something else inside her now, something new. Whenever her gaze fell on Daniel, it carried confusion, even conflict. Why had he saved her when even her own people would not? Why had he given food and warmth to an enemy? She did not speak it, but the question burned inside her. And Daniel, unaware of the storm in her heart, only kept offering kindness. One evening, she finally showed him something hidden. From the folds of her broken armor, she pulled out a small crest. It was a shard of metal shaped like the symbol of her clan. The edges were sharp, and her fingers gripped it tightly as if it were her last piece of identity. She pressed it to her chest, her expression fierce, then threw it into the fire. The flames swallowed it with a hiss, sparks flying into the dark. Daniel stared, shocked by the sudden act. The girl's eyes glowed brighter, tears forming though she tried to hide them. That night, she spoke more words than ever before. Daniel could not catch them all, but he understood one thing clearly. She was no longer part of them. The warrior who once had a clan now stood alone. And yet, in that brokenness, something else began to grow. She looked at Daniel differently, as if searching for answers she could not find. Her pride still lived, her anger still burned. But beneath it all was the faint spark of trust, fragile but real. Daniel did not realize the depth of what she had shared. To him, it was only another moment of survival, another night in the ruins. But for her, it was the beginning of change. A dangerous truth had been born in her heart. The thought that maybe this human was more than weak. Maybe he was something she had never believed possible. The warrior girl had lost her clan, her honor, her place in the universe. But in the silence beside the fire, she had found something else. A secret not of shame, but of hope. And though she did not say it aloud, she knew it would change everything. Because the bond between them was no longer just survival. It was becoming destiny. Enemies in the dark, The night after the burning of the crest was uneasy. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying with it the sharp smell of rust and ash. Daniel sat near the fire, his old rifle resting across his knees. The warrior girl sat close but silent, her glowing eyes watching the shifting shadows. For a time, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. But then, Daniel heard something faint, a scrape of metal, a crunch of gravel, footsteps too heavy to be the wind. His chest tightened, and he slowly raised his head. The girl had already noticed. Her body tensed, her hand gripping the broken blade she still carried. Her pride might have been wounded, her strength not fully returned. But her instincts as a warrior were sharp, and she knew danger when it was near. From the darkness, shapes began to appear. At first, only shadows, then figures cloaked in scavenged armor. Raiders, humans who had turned to blood and plunder after the war. Their eyes glowed with greed when they spotted the small fire. Daniel cursed under his breath. He had seen raiders before, men who killed for scraps. He stood slowly, leveling his rifle, though he knew he was outnumbered. There were at least 6 of them, armed with blades and stolen guns. The leader of the raiders stepped forward, a scar running across his face. "Look what we've got here," he sneered, a lonely scavenger with a prize. His gaze shifted to the warrior girl, and his grin widened. To think an alien warrior, weak and starving, worth more than all the supplies in this sector. Daniel's grip tightened on the rifle. The warrior girl hissed in her own tongue, her pride flaring even in weakness. Her glowing eyes narrowed, and for a moment Daniel thought she would charge at them. But her legs trembled, and he knew she could not fight alone. The raiders moved closer, their weapons glinting in the firelight. Daniel's heart pounded, but he did not back away. He lifted his rifle and fired, the shot echoing through the ruins. One raider fell, clutching his chest, the others snarling in rage. The fight exploded in an instant. Bullets cracked, blades flashed, shadows danced around the fire. Daniel fired again, hitting another, but his old rifle jammed after the second shot. The raiders laughed, closing in with their knives. The warrior girl rose, her body shaking, but her spirit fierce. She swung her broken blade with surprising strength. The metal clashed against a raider's sword, sparks flying in the dark. Though weak, her strikes carried the precision of a trained fighter. Daniel grabbed a metal pipe from the ground, using it like a club. He swung wildly, knocking one raider back. Pain shot through his arms, but he did not stop. His body screamed in fear, but his heart refused to let her fall. For a moment, the two of them fought side by side, human and alien, scavenger and warrior, back to back in the firelight. Daniel's blows were clumsy but determined. Her strikes were graceful but fueled by desperation. The raiders underestimated them. They thought it would be easy prey, but now they faced something far stronger. Not just 2 survivors, but 2 souls refusing to bow. The battle raged in the ruins, echoing like thunder in the night. Finally, the last raider stumbled back, bleeding and cursing. The survivors fled into the dark, leaving their fallen behind. Daniel dropped to his knees, gasping for breath, his arms heavy and sore. Beside him, the warrior girl stood trembling, her chest heaving, but her eyes blazing with victory. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled, the wind howled, but between them was only silence. Then the girl looked at Daniel, her lips parting as if to speak. Her voice came low, rough, but clear, human strong. Daniel blinked, stunned by the words. It was the first time she had spoken in his language. Even if broken, something inside him shifted. Her pride was still alive, but now mixed with respect. She sat down heavily, exhaustion taking over. Daniel moved beside her, placing the coat back around her shoulders. For once, she did not resist. Her eyes closed slowly, but the faintest smile touched her lips. The danger was not over. Raiders would return. More enemies lurked in the ruins. But that night, something more powerful had been born. In the firelight, trust had turned to respect, and respect was the seed of something greater. Neither of them knew it yet, but the bond forged in blood and battle was unbreakable, and it would carry them through trials darker than this night. Enemies in the dark had failed, but destiny was only beginning. The turning point. The morning after the raider attack was heavy with silence. The ruins smelled of smoke and blood, and Daniel's arms still ached from the desperate fight. He sat near the ashes of the fire, staring at the dented rifle in his lap. It had jammed at the worst time, almost costing both of them their lives. The warrior girl stirred, her glowing eyes opening slowly. Her body was bruised and weak, but her spirit burned bright. For the first time, Daniel noticed something different in her gaze. Not just suspicion, not just pride, but a strange glimmer of respect. She watched him for a while before moving closer. Without a word, she picked up a piece of metal pipe he had used in the fight. With sharp movements of her hands, she mimicked the way he had swung it. Then she shook her head, her lips curling with faint amusement. Daniel frowned, not understanding at first. But when she repeated the motion, he realized she was mocking him, mocking the wild, clumsy way he had fought. Her laughter was rough, broken, but real, and it echoed strangely through the ruins. For a moment, Daniel only stared, surprised by the sound. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, and it did not sound cruel. It sounded alive, almost human, and though she still mocked his weakness, it was not with anger. It was with curiosity. The girl stood shakily, holding the broken blade in her hand. She pointed at him, then at the pipe, then moved into a fighting stance. Her meaning was clear. She would teach him. Daniel hesitated, but her sharp eyes left no room for refusal. The training began clumsy and awkward. She struck at him lightly, correcting his stance with impatient gestures. When he failed, she sighed loudly, rolling her eyes. But when he managed a proper block or swing, she nodded once, a tiny spark of approval. Daniel was no warrior, but he learned quickly. Each mistake turned into a lesson, each bruise into determination. His movements grew sharper, his strikes heavier. The girl's expression changed slowly, her amusement fading into focus. Hours passed, the ruins ringing with the clash of metal against metal. Daniel's body screamed with exhaustion, but he refused to stop. Something inside him pushed harder than hunger or fear. It was the knowledge that she, a true warrior, was watching him, judging him. At last, she struck harder, forcing him back. Daniel nearly fell, but instead of giving up, he roared and swung the pipe with all his strength. The strike landed close, and for a heartbeat she staggered, surprised. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, and finally she smiled. Not a mocking smile this time, but something deeper. A recognition that this human was not just surviving. He was growing. Her pride, once unshakable, began to shift. The line between teacher and student blurred. That night, as they rested by the fire, there was no heavy silence. She sat beside him without distance, her broken blade resting across her knees. Every now and then she glanced at him, as if replaying the training in her mind. And once, when the wind grew colder, she leaned slightly closer to the warmth of his side. Daniel did not move, did not speak, but inside his chest, something stirred, something he did not want to name yet. The warrior girl, who had once looked at him with nothing but contempt, now looked with something more. Not trust alone, not respect alone, but the beginning of something far more dangerous. The turning point had come quietly. In the ruins of war, where laughter had been impossible, she had laughed. Where weakness had been shame, she had taught him. And where survival had been enough, something new had begun. Neither of them could see where it would lead, but both felt it in their hearts. The bond was no longer fragile. It was becoming strong, sharp, and alive. A bond that no raiders, no clans, no ruins could break. And in the firelight, as the night stretched over the battlefield, the future bride of a human sat beside him, unaware of the destiny she was already choosing. The final stand. The ruins had never been safe, but now they felt more dangerous than ever. Daniel and the warrior girl had trained together for days, their bond growing with every clash of blade and pipe. She was stronger now, though her scars remained, her body no longer trembling with weakness. Daniel, too, had changed, his strikes sharper, his stance firmer, his courage unshaken. But the world around them was not blind. Raiders whispered of a human and an alien warrior surviving together. And soon, their enemies grew bolder, shadows gathering in the dark. The girl sensed it first, her instincts honed by a lifetime of battle. One evening, as the sky burned red with dying light, the attack came. Dozens of raiders stormed the ruins, their weapons flashing, their voices screaming like beasts. They wanted revenge for their fallen, and they wanted the girl alive. Her capture meant power, and her death meant pride. Daniel stood at the broken wall, his pipe gripped tightly in his hands. His heart thundered, but he did not back down. The girl beside him raised her broken blade, her glowing eyes fierce with fire. For the first time, she did not look at him as weak. She looked at him as an equal, a warrior at her side. The battle exploded like thunder. Gunfire cracked, blades clashed, and the ruins shook under the weight of screams. Daniel fought like a man possessed, swinging his weapon with fury. Every strike was fueled not by survival alone, but by the bond he refused to lose. The girl moved like lightning, her strikes precise and deadly despite her broken weapon. Her body danced with strength and memory. But even with both of them together, the raiders pressed hard. The tide of enemies seemed endless, shadows flooding from every side. Daniel's arms ached, his chest burned, but he did not falter. When one raider's blade came close, the girl struck it aside, protecting him. When another lunged toward her back, Daniel slammed the pipe into the man's skull. Their movements flowed together, two lives fighting as one. But then, the leader appeared, a massive raider with heavy armor and a jagged blade. His eyes locked on the girl with cruel hunger. "You should have died in the ruins," he growled. "Now you belong to us." The girl snarled, stepping forward. But Daniel stopped her with a hand, shaking his head. He stepped into the open, his pipe in his grip. He was only a human scavenger, yet he stood against the monster with unshakable resolve. The fight was brutal. The raider's blade slashed, tearing through the air. Daniel blocked with his pipe, the metal bending under the force. Pain ripped through his arms, but he refused to fall. The girl cried out in her language, warning him, begging him, but Daniel pushed forward, striking again and again. His body was failing, blood dripping from cuts across his skin, yet his eyes never wavered, his heart never broke. Finally, the raider knocked him to the ground, the jagged blade raised high. But before the strike could fall, the girl moved. With a scream that shook the ruins, she leapt forward. Her broken blade drove deep into the raider's chest, piercing through armor. The leader staggered, choking, his eyes wide with shock. Then he collapsed, the ground trembling as his body fell. The other raiders, seeing their leader dead, fled into the night. The ruins fell silent once more, broken only by the sound of ragged breaths. Daniel lay on the ground, his vision blurred. The girl knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding. Her pride shattered, her eyes wide with fear, not of enemies, but of losing him. "Human," she whispered, her voice breaking, "no die." Daniel forced a weak smile. "I'm not done yet," he murmured, his voice rough but steady. Her hand gripped his tightly, stronger than words. For the first time, her warrior's mask cracked completely, and he saw the truth in her eyes. She had fought not just for survival, not just for honor. She had fought for him. And in that moment, she realized she could not imagine the world without him. The final stand had not only broken the enemy, it had broken the wall between them. Human and alien, scavenger and warrior had become more than allies. They had become bound, not by chance, but by destiny. And as the night swallowed the battlefield once more, The girl whispered a vow in her tongue, a vow Daniel could not yet understand. But one day he would know its meaning, for it was not just a promise of loyalty, but of a future together. The future bride. The battle had ended, but the silence that followed was heavier than the clash of blades. The ruins were filled with smoke and the smell of blood. Daniel sat against a broken wall, his body torn with wounds, his hands still trembling from the fight. Beside him, the warrior girl crouched low, her glowing eyes locked on his face. For the first time since he had found her, there was no pride in her expression. No walls, no distance, only raw fear. She pressed cloth against his bleeding side, her hands rough from war, but gentle in that moment. "Stay," she whispered in broken human words, her voice unsteady. "Stay alive." Daniel forced a faint smile, his breath ragged. "I'm trying," he answered, his voice weak but steady. She leaned closer, her forehead brushing his for a brief heartbeat. It was a gesture not of warriors, not of enemies, but of something far deeper. For days they hid among the ruins, nursing wounds and sharing silence. The girl hunted small creatures for food. Daniel built fires and repaired what little weapons they had. Together they survived, but something inside both of them had changed. It was no longer just survival, it was belonging. Every glance she gave him carried meaning. Every smile he forced through pain broke another piece of her walls. She had once been abandoned by her clan, thrown away as worthless. But now, in this broken human, she saw loyalty stronger than any bond she had ever known. One night, under a sky filled with shattered stars, she finally spoke. Her voice was steady, though her language was still broken. "You gave food when death," she said slowly, her glowing eyes holding his. "You fight when no chance, you stay when all leave." Daniel looked at her quietly, unsure of what to say. But the truth was already written across her face. She reached out, placing her scarred hand over his chest, where his heart beat faintly beneath torn clothes. "Human mine," she whispered, the words trembling but certain. It was not a claim of ownership, not a boast of conquest. It was a vow, spoken in the only way she knew, a vow that bound her to him, not as an enemy, not as a warrior, but as something far more. In her culture, such words carried weight deeper than marriage, deeper than blood. Daniel's throat tightened, his hands slowly rising to cover hers. He did not fully understand her traditions, her vows, her world, but he understood her eyes, her touch, her voice. And in that moment, he knew she was no longer just a stranger he had saved. Days turned into weeks, the ruins slowly becoming less a prison and more a home. They trained together, laughed awkwardly and shared mistakes, sat close by the fire when the nights grew cold. Every scar on their bodies became a story. Every silence between them became comfort. And though no words were spoken of the future, both could feel it. Something unshakable had begun. When they finally left the battlefield behind, the warrior girl did not walk ahead or behind. She walked beside him, step for step, her broken blade at her side and her eyes sharp with pride once more. But it was not the pride of the clan that had abandoned her. It was a new pride, born of the bond she had chosen. The universe would not understand. Humans and her kind were enemies, bound by history and hatred. But fate had ignored such lines. A starving warrior had been saved by a human's kindness, and in return, she had given him her vow. Years later, when stories were told of the ruins, none spoke of the broken ships or the raiders. They spoke of the bond forged in hunger and blood, of a human who gave food to a dying warrior, and of the warrior who vowed her life to him. And those who listened would whisper of the strange destiny that followed. Daniel never sought glory, never sought to be remembered. But the day he offered his last ration bar, he had unknowingly changed both their worlds. For in saving a starving warrior girl, he had not just saved a life. He had found his future bride.